Isn't it a common mission of us all that when the day we die, we want to know we made a difference?
Just give me time to work it out, time to get it right, time to put it all together.
Diana was wonderful with the people, and she didn't have much education.
I resigned. I had a right to resign, and a right not to be treated with such premeditated incivility, and a right not to be traduced in a false press release from Government House.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, The Zoomer, with Conrad Black and Denise Donlan.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to The Zoomer. Today we're going to focus on the legacy that we leave. So some folks say, when I'm gone, I'm gone. And other folks say, geez, I hope they say nice things about me. And we're going to warm up the house with a special musical performance by Shakura S'aida. That's going to be fun.
And Denise and I have a fascinating conversation with my friend, the thinker and writer, David Frum.
He must really feel the legacy of his mom, Barbara Frum, because she was a really smart cook, true broadcasting pioneer.
Yeah, it's a very brainy family, and his late father, Murray, was a very intelligent man, too, and his sister, Senator Linda Frum, they're very intelligent, and David's the intellectual of the family, but they're a distinguished family in every respect.
God, what a legacy to have an excellent gene pool. We're looking forward to that. Today we're talking about legacy. Let's tee up the topic.
A legacy is a gift conveyed from one person to another, or not. The average inheritance in Canada is $56,000, and that's going to grow fourfold in the coming years. Don't bet on your willed windfall just yet. Charities are banking on getting a bunch. In the age of celebrity, people want to do good and be remembered for it. Bill Gates started the Giving Pledge, where big money moguls donate half their fortunes to charity. Canadian comic John Wing hopes to build a hospital wing in his name, the Wing Wing. In the end, legacy can be good parenting, selfless community service, or providing for others after your passing, like Leona Helmsley, who left $12 million to her dog, a Maltese who became one rich, do I have to say it?
So our mantra for discussion today is live well, do good, die broke. Those are Moses Narmer's words. Conrad, what does living well mean to you?
Well, enjoying yourself, as long as you aren't sociopathic and commit illegalities, but and do what you are good at, have an aptitude for and like doing, and try and get the most out of things in a constructive way. I mean, they're platitudes and bromides, but that's living well.
Is it?
I wouldn't overstress the dying broke part of it.
What about you? So Sandra, your book, which was just an amazing book, Working the Deadbeat, 50 Lives That Changed Canada, came as a result of your job writing obituaries in the Globe, right? But I expect the idea of legacy comes into how you choose who to write about.
Sometimes when I'm writing about people, I'm in the non-legacy business. I'm trying to write about them as human beings, as people who achieved things, but also I want to talk about the warts and all, which is not usually what's considered part of the legacy. There's no such thing as an uninteresting life. And,
right. But sometimes you pre-interview people before they're dead. Have you ever been called by Sandra? Getting ready? No?
Who is it? Hang up! Hang up!
I agree with what you said, Sandra. A lot of these people that are not known still have a very interesting life. And what we can do to draw out of that the most interesting aspect is terribly important. When Boris Johnson, who was interviewed in this program a few weeks ago, Mayor of London, left journalism and editing for politics as an MP, one of his journalist friends said, "Why are you doing it?" And he said, "Well, they don't build statues to journalists, do they? But that isn't the only reason to do it. And it's terribly important to make the most of these people." I knew that as a newspaper owner with the obits we published. And you can always find something interesting in someone's life.
That's what I like about the Lives They Lived column, because it's about people. It's the lives they lived, and we don't usually know who they were. I mean, I've happened to come across people I know, but mostly not. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're saying, that those people have lived a life that's left a legacy, and this is who they touched. It's written by a relative or someone.
Well, yeah, that's different from an obituary, of course, because I write journalism, and that's written by a family member.
Sure.
So I mean,
some of whom might be journalists.
Well, they might, but I mean, it's not the same kind of thing.
But it is about a legacy.
It is about a person's life,
legacy.
and it's how they touch them. But what I think is really interesting is to set a life in the context of the time, so that you actually end up, I hope, with an obituary as being a little bit of a building block towards a country's social and cultural history. When you put all those pieces together, one life at a time, you get a sense of what was going on in this country. The Chinese head taxpayer who nobody remembers, but who lived long enough to see redress, to get redress, and to see Prime Minister Harper apologize, or other people, the people you've never heard of who turn out to have had extraordinary war careers. They just break me up.
And Frank, your book, Do the Next Right Thing, is really about how you pulled yourself, you were a homeless alcoholic, right?
Yes, I was.
At 24 years old?
Living on the streets here in Toronto. Really what it was is I was conflicted between death or change. I really decided either had to die or change. I just couldn't do this anymore. And not because I couldn't drink anymore, or get another fight, or get arrested. I could do all that. But what I couldn't do is keep trading off everything that was in my soul. It just seemed like I had nothing left.
And you rebuilt your legacy.
And
turned it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But what happened that moment was a commercial came back to me that I'd heard on the radio, and I don't remember what the commercial said, but the tagline said, if you've got a problem with alcohol, call us, we're in the book. And at that moment, I said, call us, we're in the book. I went to King & Young, I stuck out my hand, and people went by, and somebody walked by, in and out of my life, they put a dime in my hand, and I made a phone call, I never had another drink. Talk about a legacy. Now that guy doesn't know me, never knows it, but on that dime, the rest of my life was built.
Do you have an ambition and a regret that you were not able to do what Howard Hughes did to the person who loaned him a dime and leave him $50 million?
Right, I'm still short about 20 cents.
But it must have been aberrant for you to be in that condition. Now, you were clearly a well brought up, you're obviously a very successful, intelligent man, so it must have been just freakish for you to have been a down and out person at that age.
It was the values that my father and my mom taught me as a young kid that actually saved my life 25 years later. That's legacy. If my kids can think of me the same way when they're a bit older, my job has been done. Sure, I've done some not-for-profits and I've done some businesses and done all that sort of stuff, but they'll be gone. The family continues.
Gloria, you have been, I guess you still are, a civil rights activist.
Very much so.
And I mean, you went to jail for some of your engagement down there. And part of your living well, I suppose, would be instilling your beautiful values in Shakura, yes?
Enjoying wine and traveling.
Tequila. Spending all your money.
Seriously, yes.
Yeah.
Legacy isn't really all about money. I mean, it's a huge part of it, but to get back to Frank, it is really about how you treat and you bring up your children. But there is no question that people are really starting to think at an earlier age how they want to give their money away, and how they want to attach money to values. It really isn't about money per se, but it is about how people think about what kind of values can they pass down through their money? How can they bring their children into the fold? How can they leave money to charities that might be able to instill in the community the type of values that they might have?
When I look at what my mother imparted to me, that's what I want to leave for my children and my grandchildren, the same values. And she always said it was, we lived in a village. We didn't actually live in a village.
She lived in Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn.
But it's good.
The village of Brooklyn.
And my world was defined by one lamp post to another, where she could see, and where the neighbors could see me. So it was everyone taking charge of the children in the neighborhood. And that still should be today. A sense of community has to be involved.
Part of my legacy from my parents is that I've always been very open about what I believe in and always been encouraged to not only speak about it, but to really know strongly what I believe in.
And you're going on tour together for Black History Month, right? So you're combining voice and song and history to help create or help Canadian school kids understand their legacies, their histories. Tell me about that.
I think it's more about understanding their voice. One of the things that I know, having grown up in the States and in Toronto and in Europe, is that history is really important. I know where I came from, and because I knew where I came from, going from place to place wasn't as detrimental as it might have been. Raising my children in Toronto, one of the things that I've always found is that their history has been very one-sided. And I'm a huge non-believer in Black History Month. I'm a huge believer in Canadian history all the time. We did Black History Month in White City School in Regina. It's kind of ironic, you know, White City School.
It was actually called White City School?
It was actually called White City, yeah. My mother speaking about, you know, her history, which is the civil rights movement, and walking through that. But for example, she would talk about Rosa Parks being arrested in 1954. And
That's a legacy.
But I would turn to the kids and say, by the way, that's the same year that segregation ended in Canada.
I basically started producing events so that I could, because I can't give you money to create that legacy because I couldn't write the check. I started producing events that made the check.
Right.
So that I could...
And gave people an opportunity to have their voices heard.
At the same
with
time.
Your comedy festival.
Right. But it's about writing a check. For me, it's about being able to... I can't come out of my pocket because I don't really have it. You know, I mean, I give money, but I don't have like anything with a lot of zeros on it. But I can earn it.
Well,
and I can earn it by producing a charitable event, a third-party event for a charity.
A dime is all that matters.
It's right.
It's giving something back. It's creating something. It's doing something.
Right.
You know, the Governor General, David Johnson, has been talking in his term about volunteerism and Canadians volunteering to create a better country, to leave a better place. And that's our mission. Isn't it a common mission of us all that when the day we die, we want to know we made a difference?
Well, we hope so.
Something had it.
We also, you have to remember, it's not necessarily the size of the endowment, it's how you use it.
Okay,
so our legacy isn't quite done yet. We're going to stick around. We're going to be back in a second. Live well, do good, die broke. I know Conrad always winces when I say that die broke part, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but right now we're going to talk about doing good. So Conrad, I know you have a family foundation, and I imagine you're asked to donate to lots. I see you at galas all the time. How do you choose? Where is doing good work part of the essential thing that you say yes to?
Well, we have criteria because you don't have enough money to support all the good causes, and my sister-in-law is the head of it, and we meet periodically, and you get overwhelmed with applications, and they're almost all of them worthy of support. So you just have to do what you can do, you know.
Is this an application?
Denise is not a charity.
Oh, I think Maggie was sort of self-interested with that one right there. Okay. Well, it is because you can use your powers for good, and Canadians are really good at it. I mean, aren't we? We do kind of indexed, around the world as being very good givers.
And not as good as the Americans.
Really?
No, the Americans are more generous.
They are definitely more generous than Canadians, and everybody else by that matter.
Now, the tax system historically has favored it there more than it is.
And if Canadians are told about it and it's explained well to them, people will be very generous. I remember when we were doing the Landmine Foundation, and I went to Belleville on a Sunday morning. The pastor asked me to give a sermon on landmines, so I went down and we talked about it. And I talked about 3 Cambodian villages where everybody had to leave their villages because their irrigation system had broken and they relied totally on it. And there were landmines in around the Blake, so nobody could go in and fix it. And they couldn't afford to bring in the landmine people. And some guy in the back of the church said, "How much to fix the problem?" So I said $18,000, and you know what happened by the time I got to the back of the church. Canadians gave. Canadians tend to want to support and feel like they're making a difference, and I've at least found that to be true.
Your comment about landmines reminded me that we used to have an outward philosophy of doing good when we were peacekeepers, which was really our role after Korea.
Peacekeeping, it was no doubt admirably motivated, and it was certainly well executed by Mr. Pearson, but it became a rather shabby excuse for reducing the military budget and pretending we were making a bigger contribution than we were.
It is good to be a good global citizen and to do your bit and to rush in where need is warranted. Otherwise, you know, you could end up with a bad legacy.
Did you just say Russian? Because there's a bad legacy right there. Vladimir Putin is a perfect example of a legacy that's not going to be a good one. And I think that's something that, I mean, I don't know if that's where you were going, but there are people who leave legacies and they're not good.
This is someone who didn't leave their life with a good legacy. And I'll just read it out loud. It says, "To our mother, Mona Harold Vanny, you spent your life expressing animosity for nearly every person you encountered, including your children. Within hours of his death, you even managed to declare your husband of 57 years unsuited to being either a spouse or a father. Hopefully, you are now insulated from all the dissatisfaction you found in human relationships, Buddy, Jackie, and Mike."
Forever in therapy. Is what that is.
Forever in therapy.
You didn't write that one, did you?
But a lot of times there's mistakes in the media where people are prematurely announced as dead.
As in Gordon Lightfoot.
As in Gordon Lightfoot. Here's what he had to say about it.
I heard first if you could read my mind.
Right.
And I was listening to talk radio. And then the talking guy came on and started reading my obituary. So I was on the way to the office anyway, so I just kept going. And just
without hitting a tree.
Called the radio station. I said it's not so, but by that time it was out there.
Right.
They had my picture on the front page of the Toronto Sun. The headline was "Dead Wrong."
So yeah, you can see a full Gordon Lightfoot interview coming up next week. But you know, there's been a lot of those, right? Where people have been called dead before they even got there. Dick Cheney had a premature announcement, but
Bob Hope many times.
Bob Hope many times.
Dick Cheney's not really actually alive because he doesn't have a heart. So
But I do want to say that Gordon Lightfoot did not die in the Globe and Mail.
I actually went to lunch once with a man who our newspaper had that morning reported as having died. Because he had it was a Greek ship owner, and they're all related. And the person who had died had the same name, but they published the wrong person, you see, and they published a picture of this guy.
I hope you got a hold of his
I'm really
secretary
terribly
first.
honored to be here, especially with you.
How does it feel?
That's right. Well, we're going to go to commercial remembering someone who left an amazing legacy. Folk singer, activist Pete Seeger died at 94 on January 27th. And Gloria, I bet at some of the protests in the States you sang he didn't write "We Shall Overcome," but it was the big civil rights movement song.
Many of his songs were sung during that time. I did get a chance often to see him in Greenwich Village performing. He was a man of the people.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Everybody.
Well, obviously one way of being remembered is to have a building named after you, and maybe while you're living, because the kids just might think of doing something else with all the money that you might leave them. Meanwhile, lots of big money moguls are giving their money to charity. Warren Buffett's going to give away 99% of his wealth. He says, "I want to give my kids just enough so that they feel like they could do anything, but not so much that they would feel like they're doing nothing."
You know, since we're talking about these wings, if you look carefully on the street that's on the south side of the Sick Children's Hospital, you see a reference to our wing there.
You have a wing there?
Yeah, he's got a wing. He's got a wing at
Well,
Sick
one
Kids.
does what one can, you know.
Lots of people I know, they come back from big trips. Where have you been? On a ski vacation. Spend the kids' inheritance. Like they really do want to you know, they earned it, use it.
My parents earned it. They worked hard for it. It is their money. They need to be happy, and they need to live their lives as fully as possible. If by chance something comes to me after they go, what I'll miss more is them as opposed to what the money. That's honestly how I feel.
Should we be spreading it around now? I mean, because we're talking about people who have it. There are a lot of people who don't have it right now, who are living at levels that are just, you know, frighteningly scary, and where, you know, there's something to be said to giving it away now. The guy who gave you the dime, there should be a lot of dimes flowing right now, I think in certain directions, to people who are not in a position, who can't even have this conversation, who would turn on the show and go,
exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
That's something that I think people can do right now that even people without a lot of money can do.
People, whether it's true or not, they don't feel like they can afford to make large gifts during their lifetime. They're living longer, and that's why this notion of legacy giving through one's will, is such an important one. Legacy giving or bequest giving provides the opportunity for very average Canadians to leave very above average gifts. And when I worked at a hospital foundation, the 2 largest bequests that we received were from retired nurses who left their entire estate to the hospital foundation, people who you would never in a million years consider to be wealthy.
Well, it's a good thing they had a will, because, you know, you could be thinking that you're having the best planned legacy in the world, but if you don't do the paperwork, no one's going to know about it. So here's some practical advice from our hero, Dale Goldhawk.
Thanks very much, Denise. You know, you can't have a legacy if nobody knows what it is. You need a will. You have got to write it down. Believe it or not, close to 60% of Canadians do not have a will. And if you die without a will, if you die intestate, as the lawyers say, your estate will likely come under the control of the public trustee in each province. The trustee will dole out your money and property according to their standard bureaucratic table of who gets what. Nothing like having the government meddle in your affairs, especially after you're dead. And it doesn't stop there. If you die intestate, you can inadvertently trigger squabbles among surviving relatives and siblings, trying to second guess what mom or dad really wanted to happen. In some cases, these disputes destroy family relationships. So, if you die without a will, the legacy you leave behind is, in many cases, litigation. The lawyers get your money, not the people you love, the very people you had wanted to help and protect. It costs about $200, maybe $400 for a basic will. So here's the message: if you don't have a will, it's time to say, I will.
Well done. Any advice on legacy, Maggie?
You know, just do your best. Just do your best and help as many people as you can with what you have to work with.
Be creative. Don't think that you necessarily have to name your children or your grandchildren. There are other very well-deserving organizations that could benefit from your largesse.
Sandra.
Live your life the way you want, but do something for other people, and tell your family what you're going to leave them so that they don't get a big shock.
What I want to leave afterwards is my essence, that they will remember me as a person that cared and loved.
I say do as my parents did, which is leave your children a legacy of integrity. Make sure that they understand that we are not just beholden to ourselves, but to a community, so that they always pay it forward.
You have to continue to give and do and change and be part of this community called Canada. And our job is to leave Canada a better place.
My mom's 90 and she still does charity work.
Conrad.
Decide, while there's still time, what it is you want to do. You don't get to the point where you're dying or about to die and you haven't done what you wanted to do. If you want to write something or collect something or leave a renovated or decorated house in a certain way or anything, or say something to somebody. I mean, so many people are full of regrets that they didn't sort things out with next of kin and things. Make sure you've done that, and then as to the business of a will, make it clear. I mean, these things can get terribly complicated, and they're notoriously litigated. So just make sure that whatever you do leave behind in tangible terms, it's clear what you want. And what about you, Denise?
Me? Well, I think small legacies are a wonderful thing. I think, help your mom and dad put their pictures together, write who's on the back, create some sort of family tradition, even if it's a recipe book. It's the legacy of your family and their meals together. So do small things, and then I always try and abide by, Winston Churchill, who said, we make a living by what we get, and we make a life by what we give.
He also said that history is made by the people who write it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
He did. Well, until he meets a Sandra Martin, and then there's going to be some revisions.
Yes,
We're going to be back in a second with a fabulous song from Shakura S'aida, so stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, from New York, Switzerland, and Toronto, with a song from her latest record, Time. She's about to rock our souls. Here's the wonderful Shakura S'aida.
You find inspiration in the oddest of places. So my mother has spent my inheritance on a home on wheels. It's a Mercedes Sprinter van with a shower, and it seats 7. And so we travel around in this while we're on the road. And it gets really warm in the back. I don't remember where we were, but it was summertime and it was really hot. And the band was in the front and the back and all around. And I was having the mother of a hot flash. I was about to wring somebody's neck. So I went in the back and I started writing. And all I could think about was the fact that my head was about to explode. And so I wrote a song called Time. And guys really dig it, but I think it's because they don't know it's a hot flash song. And women love it because I think they get it even though they might not get it.
There's got to be a way out, something I can do, yeah. Trapped between all or nothing, I can't seem to handle all I should. Oh, yeah. Couldn't tell you if I wanted, but why does it feel I got no good? My head is exploding, the heat burns me too. There's got to be a way out, something I can do, yeah. Just give me time to work it out, time to get it right, time to put it all together. Yeah. Come on and give me time for peace of mind, time. You know I gotta find time. Oh, it's now or never. Hold up. Common sense don't dare to mention this place of darkness so defined. Just wear a smile and I'll soon remember. Oh, just where it was I lost my mind. The heat is exploding, my head burns me too. There's got to be a way out, something I can do, yeah. Just give me time to work it out, time. I wanna get it right, time. I wanna put it all together, yeah. Come on and give me time for peace of mind, time. You know I gotta find time. Oh, it's now or never. coming down and held heaven high. I need to find some balance. Oh, fall right from the sky. Give me time. I wanna work it out on time. I wanna get it right. Time. I wanna put it all together. Come on and give me time. Oh, I wanna work it all out now. Oh, I gotta get it all out now. Oh, it's now or never, 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 never.
Since 2008, we've seen prolonged, protracted mass unemployment in the United States and in other countries. And I have to say that experience has had a big impact on my thinking.
So we're over here in Liberty Village doing our Zoomer thing, minding our own business. And over in London, the tabloids are going nuts. Conrad, your Princess Michael interview, your conversation with Princess Michael caused quite a ruckus.
It is a complete farce. Those of you who saw the interview saw that she did not say anything disparaging about the royals, but they claimed that she had said that Princess Diana was an idiot because she didn't have much education. She said nothing of the kind. They claimed that she called Prince Philip a bore. She didn't refer to him. She said the people will like young, attractive young people like the Cambridges and their new baby because they're probably getting a little tired of the old royals. What is wrong with that? Anyway, I replied to them, while I'm at it, I'm getting a little tired of being referred to as the disgraced Lord Black, too. The disgrace is in the justice system of your former country, as all people familiar with the case know. So I did reply, and you know, it's referred to in The Spectator this week, but it flags something we filmed. You know, a Zoomer crew filmed my reply to the Mail and the Express. They'll love this.
Oh, I can't wait. Keep stirring it up. Well, have a look and see if you don't agree.
Diana was wonderful with the people. She had this famous common touch. She didn't have a mother bring her up. And she didn't have much education. People love to see happy young people. I think, you know, the older generations are a bit boring for most people.
Well, I don't know about that. You know, I mean, look at the tremendous interest.
I mean, look at us.
I thought it was a charming conversation. Let's see if we get the same reaction to your conversation with David Frum. He's becoming more moderate, I think. No?
Yeah, I never thought he was lacking moderation, but he certainly moved from the reasonable right to the center, and he's sort of between parties and looked upon with curiosity by all sides right now.
Well, maybe you can talk some sense into that Tea Party, perhaps. You think?
They need it.
There you go. Let's have a look.
My guest today is David Frum, a friend of a great many years and a very highly respected commentator in this country and in the United States. David, if I may say so, you years ago wrote a book suggesting that Ronald Reagan wasn't really adequate as a conservative. They should have gone somewhat further in some areas. But I have the impression that you yourself have moved somewhat towards the center since then. Is this accurate?
I think that's fair to say. You know, back in the 1990s, American conservatives made a real run at radically reinventing the American government, and it didn't work. And that's the book I wrote about it said that this project has not succeeded. And
though Reagan himself was quite a successful president.
But the core thing that he came into office to do, which was to change, not just to change the trend lines, not just to stop the growth of government, but actually to set a reversal, to retract the guarantees made during the Johnson years and the Nixon years. That did not work. And so I wrote this book making that point, and then sort of ended it in an unsatisfactory way, saying, so what happens next? And I spent a lot of time thinking about that question in the years since. And the view I've come to is a lot of what couldn't be done then probably can't be done. And there's no sense trying it over and over again. And meanwhile, we've had since 2008 a really different kind of economic crisis than any of us ever expected to see. You know, between 1982 and 2007, quarter of a century in the United States, there were 3 recessions, all of them very mild. It was always possible after, sometimes people would lose their jobs and there'd be 6 months or 9 months of relatively serious unemployment. But that would pass, and then if you were prepared to move, if you were prepared to reinvent yourself, there was always work. There was always a promise that the availability of a job was the best social program.
No, Reagan said the only welfare system we ever had that worked was a job.
Right. Well, but since we've, and one of the things that we all took for granted in those years, people call them the Great Moderation. There was no severe inflation and there was no severe unemployment, and the major economic problems seemed, unemployment in the 30s, inflation in the 70s, we seem to have solved them. Well, it turns out that's not true. That since 2008, we've seen prolonged, protracted mass unemployment in the United States and in other countries. And I have to say that experience has had a big impact on my thinking. And a lot of ideas left over from your era, the Roosevelt era, suddenly look more, I don't mean you personally, I mean your intellectual era, suddenly seem to have new relevance.
Of course, that I agree with that. But is it not the case, I'm leading the witness here slightly, but we did have between the Reagan, Bush Sr. and Clinton years approximately 40 million jobs created, even though a substantial amount of employment was outsourced. But, and this theory advanced by the AFL-CIO that all the new jobs were hamburger flippers and pizza delivery men and so on is rubbish, of course. And productivity increases were very impressive, especially in the Reagan years. But are we not now running a risk throughout the West, other than in highly diverse resource economies like Canada and Australia, of putting too much freight on the wagon of the service industries where there's not enough value added? Aren't we just getting too many lawyers and stockbrokers and people like this who are fine and they're good people and they're motivated and they're capable, but they aren't actually adding value to anything?
Well, you have to distinguish here between output and employment. One of the things we've seen in the United States since 2010 is a real revival of manufacturing activity. There's a big profile in the New York Times recently of a textile factory that had reopened in North Carolina, making products for a company called American Apparel. Probably get your sweatshirts from there. Anyway, so American Apparel has reopened this big factory in North Carolina, and they're meeting almost all of their demand for their famous gray hooded sweatshirts out of this factory. And the factory has something like 40 people working there.
Whereas 50 years ago would have had 200 people or 300.
1,200. I mean, so they're 40. And by the way, they almost all have college degrees. They're making a pretty good income, but there are only 40 of them. And the reason they're doing it there is to make that many hoodies in Sri Lanka or Vietnam, and then to put them on a container ship which burns oil and move that container ship burning the oil across the Atlantic, or the Pacific, I'm sorry. It was cheaper to save the transportation costs and pay the slightly higher wages to those merely 40 people.
But this is just a start, because the U.S. is still the world's greatest manufacturer, but 90% of it is the high end. It's Boeing aviation down to the automobile.
But people in their minds assume, if you get manufacturing output going, you have manufacturing jobs.
That clearly is not necessarily the case.
And that's not. And the frightening thing about the future is, today, the United States plunged into this terrible economic crisis in 2007, and then a financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. And the financial crisis was really capped, and financial markets have come back to normal, and it's been recovery. Since the summer of 2009, the American economy has been expanding. And yet, the percentage of the American population at work today is no greater than it was before, at the very moment the recovery started.
It's a very slight expansion rate. The average over that period would not even be 2%, I don't think.
So people aren't going back to work even as the economy grows. And that forces us all to do some hard rethinking, because what happens? People have to live.
Now, I have said for a long time that you could kill the infrastructure problem with all these bridges falling down and potholed roads all over the place in the U.S. by employing the unemployed and putting them to work in those areas, as in conservation, as Roosevelt did. And he basically eliminated a 33% unemployment rate in a few years.
And we started this by saying, have you changed your minds about things? I have to say, since 2008, when I turned 50 in 2010, and it's hard to learn new ideas after you're 50, but I've had to...
I've found it a snap.
You're an unusual man, you're a creative intellect. But the economic world in which I'd lived and moved since I was 18 changed. And just as when I was in my teens, you had to say to all the people who lived in the post-war era, you know what, it's different. All the things that worked in the 50s and 60s have suddenly stopped working, and we need new answers. The things we were doing in the 80s and 90s have stopped working. And if you want to stay alive mentally, you have to realize that calls for some pretty radical rethinking. Because and it's not that I take back an iota of what the things I said in the 80s and 90s. They were true for the circumstances of that time. But our circumstances now are truly new.
David, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for the welcome.
I resigned from the Order of Canada when it was obvious that there would be no semblance of due process in the matter, in the letter to the Governor-General published in the National Post this morning. My removal as a Privy Councillor and Officer of the Order of Canada in a materially false press release after business hours on Friday is all that could cause me to inflict this subject, which fatigues me more than anyone else after 11 years of this idiocy, on viewers. I do not see the honours themselves as overly important, but I was glad to become a Privy Councillor because the hero of my youth, Maurice the Rocket Richard, was receiving the same honour at the same time. But there are two aspects that do, I think, raise serious issues. I was removed entirely because of my legal status in the US. No one with the slightest familiarity with the facts doubts that there are real questions about the process by which I'm officially deemed to have been convicted of 2 offences there. All the charges were abandoned, rejected by jurors, or overturned, although in that country prosecutors almost always win. In fact, all the counts were nonsense, and there's no dispute that no convictions would have been returned on these facts in the courts of this country. Yet the Governor-General's staff simply took the ostensible verdicts as proof of criminality and litigated at taxpayers' expense to prevent me having the hearing the Order of Canada statute provides. The first point is that Canada is a sovereign country, and in future cases it should not strip honours given by this country from recipients solely on the basis of foreign findings without considering whether Canadian courts would have come to different conclusions. Canada should not be the witless puppet of corrupt or misguided foreign judges and officials in determining questions that touch Canadian national identity. The second point is that I resigned from the Order of Canada when it was obvious that there would be no semblance of due process in the matter, in the letter to the Governor-General published in the National Post this morning. The Governor-General and his officials did not respond to my letter, ignored my resignation, and purported to remove me from the Order of Canada 6 weeks later and issued a false press release as they did so. I resigned. I had a right to resign, and a right not to be treated with such premeditated incivility, and a right not to be traduced in a false press release from Government House. The Governor-General and his staff are public employees acting in the name of the Queen of Canada in the monarch's physical absence from this country. Her Majesty the Queen does not execute her office in this petty and dishonest manner, and Canadians who pay these people to act with honesty and dignity and common decency should require them to do so. This silly case is closed and has been an irritating finale to a protracted injustice. But with this precedent, if not admonished to do better, these people will continue to inflict what Shakespeare called the insolence of office on others. Don't let them do it. You could be next.
Conrad, next week on the show, we're looking for love. It's all about Zoomer dating.
And you have a date with my friend and neighbor, Gordon Lightfoot.
I do, yeah. He's on the road again at 75 years old. It was a real delight to catch up with him again. And you're going to see what Gordon's up to and maybe even who he's dating. So let's zoom out.